Hello and welcome everyone to the State of Brand Strategy with Debbie Millman and Millman David Aaker. We're not sure where David's gone. He just posted on LinkedIn that he's joining the live panel, but we haven't heard from him on email or anything. But we're going to go on with the show and we're going to still talk about the state of brand strategy. We're going to have a rough outline of what's working today, some of the shifts and challenges we're facing, and then the future of brand. So that's what we're going to chat today. But with that, I should do a little introduction. So Debbie Millman, wow, it's an absolute honor to have you on with us for the Brand Builder Summit. We have many excited people here to talk with you and to listen from you as well. For those who haven't met Debbie, she's a designer, writer, educator, and host of the OG podcast Design Matters, which is like 20 years of podcasting, which is absolutely bonkers.
It is bonkers.
Yeah, one of the most influential people in design, culture, and just all-around awesome person. So yeah, absolutely honored to have you here and really excited to get into this conversation on brand and strategy in the future. So we're going to talk about what's working, what's changing in the future, as I said, and yeah, field some questions from the audience. So for people joining new today, just for the UI of this chat interface, there is a question mark at the bottom of the screen where you can put your questions, and you can put it there and then upvote questions that you want to get answered. And Darren, our moderator, is going to put the questions on the screen there, as you can see kind of up there now. So that's how it's going to work. If you have questions as we go, and that's our loose structure. So let's get in.
And I love questions. Like, that's always my favorite part of doing a talk is the questions, because those are more in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a rough structure, but we can go on tangents and everything. So let's start with the here and now, Debbie. So when you look across the branding landscape, what do you see? What strategies actually moving the needle these days?
Well, I think a lot of people don't actually know what strategy is.
Well, let's start with definitions. Yeah.
Yeah. So they sort of put branding and strategy in the same boat when they're talking about these disciplines. And strategy is one of the aspects of branding, but it's not the only aspect. The interesting thing about brand strategy from my perspective is that sound strategic work leads you to the brand. I believe that brand strategy is a journey that you take of discovery, which results in the work that you need to do to build a brand. And you only have a brand when enough people are in consensus about what that brand means. What that brand means doesn't just grow out of the earth. It's positioning and strategy that develops that foundation. So that's a lot of what I think people sometimes miss about brand strategy. I think a lot of designers think that brand strategy is design strategy, and they're very, very different things.
Absolutely. So how do you approach strategy then?
Oh, well, that's like asking somebody how they fall in love.
Tough question.
For me, the way I approach brand strategy is to start at the source. And that is, and this in some ways borrows from Simon Sinek, but I've been doing it for a long time. And I think that everything that he says about the why question is indeed true. I just don't want anybody to think that I stole it from him. I've been working in that sphere for a long time. And it's really about, why are you doing this? Why are you creating this brand? Why are you making this thing? If you're making this thing to compete with something else that's already out there, there needs to either be a clear differentiating point of view, or don't bother, because people aren't interested anymore in a different form or a different flavor. They're interested in, how is this brand going to make a difference in my life? And that, figuring that out, is brand strategy. So the first question is, why do you want to do this? Is this just an extension off of a cookie that's going to make it the 114th flavor in the family of cookies? Or is it some type of biscuit that is going to reinvent the way people can consume or engage with biscuits because of some interesting story that you're telling them about it, and the flavor and the shape and the metaphor and everything else that comes along with having a really good product.
Absolutely. And another thing we
And
often
that's
struggle
just the
with.
beginning. I mean, you asked me how I approach it. That's just the first question, which is, why do you want to do this? And I challenge a lot of my clients, why do we need this thing? Why does the world need this soft drink? Why does the world need this sneaker? Why does the world need this over-the-counter pharmaceutical or this crisp? And so if they can tell you why and how it is going to be deliberately differentiated between all the other products that are out there, only then can you make something that has real soul and meaning. Otherwise, you're just making a copycat Me Too question. So that's a big part of the way I start. The follow through is developing that positioning. If they can say, yes, this is how we're going to make this different, then you develop the strategy to communicate that. Then you create, after you have the strategy, you develop all of the visual language. And that's when you can start working on the way it shows up on shelf or in somebody's hand or on somebody's feet or however else you're planning on delivering this to people. And that takes some real work,
It does. It
but it's
does.
fun. I mean, that creating something from nothing is a lot more fun than making a Me Too product that's only being launched to help a P&L. And chances are that P&L is in bad shape, and that's why they have to do something that is a bit more of a Hail Mary.
Totally. And I love how you're starting with why, but then you said something around soul, which I want to dive a little bit deeper into, because let's unpack that. So differentiated, but with soul, with meaning. So how do you bring soul into your work?
How do you bring soul into your work?
Well, how do you find, well, maybe not into your work, but how do you find the soul of a client's, idea or strategy or product?
Well, it's a really interesting question because brands don't really have souls. And I think this is what people get wrong about personal branding. Anybody that tells me that they're aspiring to be a personal brand, I bristle, because brands are not personal. Brands are impersonal in that brands don't self direct, brands don't breathe, brands don't bleed, brands don't have a real consciousness, any kind of consciousness. All brands are directed by a human. And so any soul that's going to be embedded in the human, in any soul that's going to be embedded in the brand, needs to come from the human that's embedding their ideas and their spirit in this product. And I think the most successful brands have a sense of the founder's DNA embedded in the product. That doesn't mean that founder has to be the founder forever, certainly can't live forever, but their values are embedded in that brand. And if you can embed values that people understand, that people can repeat, that people can live, you're going to reach people in a more meaningful way. And that's what I mean by soul.
So how are you extracting this from the founder then? How do you get that soul out of them? If it's a personal aspect, right, from a founder, how are you getting that from them?
Well, that's again going back to, why are you making this thing? And I believe that you have to feel so strongly about what the brand can contribute and how it can benefit others that it almost becomes a service that you're providing through the exchange of the brand. If you can't tell me what the benefit is of somebody engaging with your brand, now it could just be fun, it could just be bliss, it could be glee. If you can't tell me what you hope the people that are going to be engaging with your brand can feel and get, then why are you doing this? And I'm talking about real values. I'm not talking about social cachet. I'm not talking about if you use this shampoo, you will feel better about yourself. Because we metabolize everything. We metabolize all of our feelings about anything. And if people are using their brands to buoy up their sense of security, sense of value, sense of worth, it's really a fool's game because it's never going to be enough. That's what we call the hedonistic treadmill. And you'll always need more to be able to get the feeling of the thing that you had before that. You know, if you think about a pair of shoes, and I know a lot of people are going to be able to relate to this. You get a new pair of shoes and they're shiny and clean, and suddenly you put it on with your existing outfits and you're like, oh, my clothes look shabby next to these shoes. But that doesn't last for very long. A, the shoes start to get worn in, but B, you also get used to what those shoes look like on you, what they communicate about you, because everything that we put on ourselves communicates something about who we are. And you metabolize that new thing. The most the categories of brands that most play on that metabolism are technology brands and fashion brands. And I'm not saying that it's bad to have seasons of clothes that are in or out, but what it does is force people to feel that what they currently have isn't good enough. Most people don't have a real sense of being okay with themselves. And that's a controversial thing to say, but I've done enough market research to understand that most people are using or choosing the brands that they want in their lives with the hope that it's going to make their hair shinier, or their teeth whiter, or they'll be cooler, or they will be able to project a persona as opposed to the person. And that's what we get back to the whole notion of personal brands, which I find so troubling. Brands are manufactured, brands are all manufactured. We create a construct through the use of strategy, and we use that construct to create a world that people can inhabit, the world of that brand. But it's not personal. Brands don't care whether or not you buy them. They don't have an opinion. And so once you put yourself in a position of being a personal brand, I think you end up taking so much away from your ability to have an opinion, to be able to change your mind about things, and to be messy. It looks like David's here.
David is here. Debbie, I'm loving this conversation, and we were talking about the state of brand, and it just moved into personal branding and soul, and I love it. But David's here now, so just to catch you up, David, we have been talking about soul and personal branding, and yeah, the idea is to cover what's working today, some shifts and challenges of the market, and perhaps the future of brand. You are on mute, just in case you're talking right now. You can click.
How to get off it? Am I off it now? Am I okay?
Oh,
yeah. I'm so apologize. I had it in my calendar at 2. I don't know why, and so I thought it was at 2. And so
we're here now. We're here now. No worries at all. We saw your LinkedIn post, and we're like, he just posted about it. Where is he?
You know, somebody in the comments, I was looking at the comments, somebody wrote, and this was, I think, really, really smart. It was David, I think DeFeo, said that people should think more about their reputation. And I 100% agree. When people ask me, well, if I'm not building my personal brand, what should I be working on? Your reputation, your character. That's what people will be able to connect with.
My daughter, who's talking to people, often uses the word reputation instead of brand, because for some people that that's more sort of meaningful or more actionable to them or more relevant to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had that circled on my paper to ask about our reputation when we're talking about personal branding. But let's talk about we can move away from personal branding, but talk about the shifts that are happening today. Because the topic of AI, social media noise, cultural upheaval. Debbie, you're pretty in tune with culture, so I'd love to hear from your perspective. Like, what do you see the biggest shifts are happening right now, and how should brands, and perhaps let's talk about personal brands, adapt to these shifts?
Hey, Jacob, can I ask you a favor? Can you
Yes.
ask David the first question? Because he hasn't had a chance to talk yet, and I've been blathering on for the last 20 minutes.
Okay, so let's talk about David. So, what do you see as the long-term challenges when it comes to business? Like, what are they struggling with now? Like the big gaps they're not addressing?
Well, I think there's three of them. One is that the communication environment now is so hostile. There's information overload. There's rampant skepticism and there's polarization, and as a result, people look at this as just noise. And so there's a couple of things you can do about that. One is you can have some communications that's so emotional, so informative, so entertaining that they're distracted from counter arguing or being annoyed. And so I talk about for example the Hellman's mayonnaise that put out this program to make taste, not waste. And they had these TV commercials in which they had a football player whose real name was Mayo. But anyway, he would tackle people like a grandmother just about to waste food by putting it in the waste paper basket. It was hilarious, and it was so shareable that that in this terrible category, they grew shares at 10 or 11% 2 years in a row. And so the point is that if you to get attention, you really have to not just talk about yourself, your product. And the second thing is, it's really gotten into taglines, and taglines can is sort of not something people think about a lot, but it can be really strategically important. It can position the brand in people's minds, and it can get into memory, which is so hard. And it can also frame the conversation. And it's all about framing the conversation at the end of the day. And the third thing is look to engagement instead of talking at people. Look at things like events, like sponsorships, like brand communities, and so on. The second problem, I think, is the speed. The speed of innovation now is so much that disruptive innovation happens much more frequently and with much more impact than it ever has before. And in that score, I really think that branding is under leveraged and underappreciated, because when you have a disruptive innovation, you've got to define, really brand the disruption, and you have to build barriers for others. You have to scale it. And these are all branding problems. And if you look at the big books on disruptive innovation, they don't even mention branding. And the Blue Ocean book has a half a page in talking about the first mover advantage. It's not there. And so I think that's a thing. The third thing is, I think that especially with the new administration cutting the safety net everywhere, the companies have to really even step up even more in terms of helping nonprofits and helping those that are in need. And in my last book on purpose-driven branding, I talk about that what needs to be done is don't rely on grants and volunteering, but become a partner with a nonprofit and build that into your brand so that the brand gets an energy lift, brand gets an image lift, and brand gets engagement, and things that most brands almost find it impossible to gain, and yet they need them. And here's a way to do that and to really help, help society at the same time.
So we had information overload, skepticism, innovation, and how would you define the last point?
Well, I talk about signature social programs. The need to create you need to adopt a nonprofit or create a signature social program of your own, and then you use that not only to help people, and the sort of the poster child example is Dove Real Beauty. They've taken a program in over 17 years. They have literally changed the life of hundreds of millions of women and girls. And at the same time, they've taken a business that was at 2.6 billion and grew it to 6.5 billion, all on the engine of Real Beauty. And so anyway, that's what I'm talking about.
I think that Unilever did a good job with Dove, and transparently, I'll share that it was about 25 years ago at this point, I participated in some of that work. However, and I think this is something that is more relevant than ever right now, Unilever also makes Axe body spray and body care for men. And for a long time, they had a product in India that was a cream that could lighten brown skin. So when you look at a portfolio like that, yes, I think that Dove did a great job allowing women to feel more comfortable in their own skin, like literally and figuratively. But when you have a portfolio that includes products that, in my mind, are morally questionable, maybe Axe has its own issues, but it's not quite as morally reprehensible to me as Jordania put in the chat. Fair and Lovely, that was the name of the brand. Now, I think they have gotten rid of it or have sold it. They probably should have just buried it and taken all of the money that they've made and give it to charity, but they're not going to do that. They're also a company that is the owner of Ben and Jerry's. And if anybody saw the news yesterday, they saw that Jerry quit because he felt that he was no longer able to agree with the politics of Unilever. And so I think we're at this really interesting time when, and again, as David talked about, the sort of polarization. What do we stand for? What do we allow? Humans have choices every single day, and companies, corporations, don't altruistically put things on shelves. They only will keep things on shelves if people buy the things that they're putting on the shelves. And so we have a lot more power than we realize, because I joke a lot that somebody out there must really love peach flavored powdered iced tea because people buy it. It's on the shelves. And so as long as somebody is willing to buy something, there will be somebody willing to sell it. And if we as a collective community took that power more seriously, I think we'd be living in a somewhat less polarizing world.
We're talking about purpose here, right? Kind of dancing around that. And it's definitely a hot topic. And Unilever, at one point, they tried to make all their brands have a purpose, and they've kind of backtracked on that.
Yeah, exactly. And Dove was such a great example. I mean, why couldn't they continue to do that?
Well, gosh, Debbie, you're bringing up so many great issues. It's hard to know where to start. One issue, I think, is that, I think that a lot of people in this country, especially those that believe in purpose and sustainability and so on, they have this, you have to be perfect. And I think that's too high a standard. If Unilever's done so much good, not only they're the male, isn't home and spell Unilever? I don't know. Anyway, they've got not only Dove, but they've got another 15 or 20 brands that are doing things almost as good as Dove. And I think you have to give them credit for that, and not saying that because they're not perfect everywhere in the company, therefore they're cynical. And of course, the reason they're doing this for Dove is because they want to build a business. I mean, they're not just doing it to help women and children, even though they have a passion for that. They're doing that to help their business, and that's what it should be. I mean, that's what they are hired to do. That's what they're trained to do. That's what we want them to do. And if they can help women and children, you look at Pepsi, for example. The CEO of Pepsi, Indra, did amazing stuff over the years, and she bought 7 or 8 companies that are healthy. The Frito-Lay is products almost to a person is I don't know, 30% less unhealthy than they used to be. And so she's made a big difference. But, they look at her and say, you're still selling some Coke. You're all bad. I mean, I think you got to not have such a high standard. And I think you have to give them credit for what she did. A lot of amazing things for people, even though Frito-Lay still makes chips. They're just not as unhealthy as they used to be. They still sell soda, but they're not as unhealthy as they used to be. Much less sugar is out there. And so anyway, that's my take.
I mean, I think that I agree with some of that. I do think that people care, younger people, certainly way younger than me, are really looking at a company's values, a company's vision, a company's mission, and making strategic decisions about what they want to pay for and give their money, what companies they want to give their money to. I do think I would feel a little bit better about Unilever at the moment if this issue with Ben and Jerry's hadn't come up, because I think that...
Well, Ben and Jerry's is an outlier. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they're just such an outlier that it's hard to generalize from them. But I have to say,
how are they being more or less an outlier than Dove? I mean, they're saying they're representing different things, but ultimately what they stand for had a lot in common.
Well, when they bought Ben and Jerry's, they said you're completely off the wall, flaky. You can continue to be so, and that's fine. And I was going to say that Axis changed. I don't know if you know that, but about 5 or 6 years ago, they became a sustainable brand they became a sustainable brand because they changed their whole positioning and made it, you want to be the man you can be proud of and look in the mirror and so on. So they completely changed.
Yeah.
And then they became a sustainable brand and it did. I think they did it. I'm so sorry about that, but anyway, sorry. Anyway, they became a sustainable brand, and they earned the right. And I think the way they earned the right is they were coming to meetings of the family of Unilever, and they were uncomfortable, and they were made uncomfortable. Nobody told them, you can't do this anymore. You have to change your strategy. But they were made uncomfortable. And I think that and of course, their old strategy was not as effective as it used to be. And so there was that. But anyway, they did change.
All right. Debbie, I'll come back to the original question around the world of AI tools and social media cultural upheaval. So I'd love to hear your perspective on these shifts, aside from purpose, and how brands need to show up today.
Well, AI has not been around for very long. I mean, we have spell check. Spell check is AI. But a lot of the same arguments and fears that I'm hearing about AI are not that different than the fears and the anxieties and the worries that I heard in the 80s about the computer. So, I'm in my 60s. And so I'm seeing a lot of repetitive behavior. What people were saying in the 80s was the computer is going to take all the soul out of the work, and real designers don't use computers. They have to be on drafting tables with T squares and Rubylith. And anybody that was an early adopter was seen as a sellout. And I remember very, very elder statesmen, designers at the time saying they were never, ever going to use a computer. And I don't want to name any names, but I visited a lot of their studios over the years when I was doing Design Matters, and saw that a lot of them were indeed, they maybe weren't like moving the mouse themselves, but they were sitting over somebody's shoulder and saying, move that there, move that there. And yes, there were some jobs that were lost, some typesetting jobs and some pre-pro jobs, but hundreds of thousands of jobs were created via the integration of technology into our lives. And I think that for disciplines like math, like science, healthcare, AI is going to be profoundly, profoundly helpful in looking at large number models, large language models, and seeing patterns and potential opportunities to understand disease better. I'm already seeing that in the eye care business, where through algorithms and AI, doctors can begin to see dementia through eye care. I mean, that's incredible. So I think that humans are always afraid of new things. That's just part of our prehistoric DNA. We can't help it. We can't help it any more than our adrenaline spike if we almost get hit by a bicycle as we're crossing the street. That these things are involuntary. Our fear of uncertainty and not being able to predict the future always engages the reptilian brain. And I think that, like any other technology, we can use it for good and to further our abilities and our talents, or we can use it for bad. And that will always be the case for everything. It's not the tool that's going to be good or bad. It's the person using the tool that will direct it. I think we're decades away from any potential sentience. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's my prediction. And so until that happens, we're still going to be the ones that have to turn on, press play, and then direct where we want to go. My last conversation with ChatGPT didn't start with their asking me a question other than, how are you doing today, Debbie? It still had to answer whatever I was asking it to do. So I think that what I'm not seeing in any AI yet is soul. And similar to what we were talking about earlier with brand strategy and with design, that can't be replicated, and I don't think it can be faked very well or for very long.
And David, do you have some thoughts on AI?
Well, there's a couple ways to look at it. One way to look at it is that it's really accelerating the pace of innovation, because there are some innovations that are based on AI. And so, as I said at the outset, the pace of innovation and the scale is just astounding if you compare it to 10 or 20 years ago. And AI is part of that. So that's one thing. Another thing is that I hope Debbie's right, but I think that there's going to be a big squeeze on jobs. And, look at the layoff of the computer programming industry, and people are saying they they don't need 5,000, they can get by with 1 or 2. And all the big companies that were just 2 years ago fighting over each other for bodies now are laying people off. But I think with respect to our business of branding, the company I'm with, Profit, has really changed dramatically in the last 12 months even. because we do things now so more efficiently than we did just a little bit ago. When doing competitor research, to do customer research, to do trend research, to get a first cut at taglines or brand pillars would take much longer than it takes now. And what that means, I think, is that the really sophisticated brand strategy work is now going to be available to much more companies than before. Before it took a quite a sizable budget to justify hiring a company or hiring people to do advanced brand strategy work, and now thanks to AI you can do it much more efficiently, and therefore I think that the number of companies that can afford to do it is maybe 10 times more. And I think well, it hasn't happened yet, but I think just in the next few years we're going to have more and more companies that have access to it. So the challenge for us is to let them know that they need it and it exists.
So what do you think is the trap or like the challenges when it comes to AI? We've been talking about soul, and in our session yesterday with Marty and Andy, we talked about taste. So I'm curious on your thoughts on AI, taste, and soul.
Well, I think the consensus is now that AI sort of gets you 70% of there, 75% there, and the other 25% you have to put in. And I don't know if that will I don't think that'll ever get down to zero. You're going to need creativity. You're going to need. Right now, AI is a little mechanical. It doesn't have emotional feel. It's hard to get emotional feel into it. And but I tell you, people start to get clever with the way they interact with AI. What questions they ask, what background information do they give them, and so there's a lot of skill involving and using AI right. It's just not a matter of using it or not using it, because there are people that are really good at it, and there are people that are just learning.
So there's kind of what you put in is what you get out. So if you don't have the nuance and the taste to understand the intricacies behind like making informed decisions, how do we navigate that? Especially beginners coming into this that are kind of just relying a bit too much.
I think you go to school and you learn from people that are good at it, and there's training programs now, and within Profit there's huge task force and initiatives and trying to apply AI to whatever we do to make it more efficient, but it's also a matter of persistence. If you ask AI a question, then you need to ask about 8 or 10 follow-up questions and try to zero it in on something that's going to be more helpful to you. So there's that.
Okay. All right. So we've talked about kind of where we are and some of the shifts and challenges that we're facing at the moment in the industry. I do want to field some questions from the audience as well. There's quite a few in there. I just want to encourage people to have a quick read through and upvote them, just if there's any that are relevant and you really want to get answered, because there's quite a few. So we'll let the audience vote on those questions. And just for our last chapter, I'd love to have a chat about the future of brand and what that could actually look like. So David, let's say if we fast forward, say 5-10 years, what do you think are the principles that are going to be most useful and true for brand building?
Well, if I go back to 30 years ago when brand equity started, I think the principles are still true today. You need to figure out what are your brand pillars, and you have to have a label on those brand pillars that is inspiring, that's exciting, that's credible, and it's relevant, and that usually is a tough job. But that's I think that's kind of where it starts. What do you stand for? And it's I've always believed it's rarely just a 3-word phrase. It's almost always multidimensional. And the second thing is, and I might be alone in believing this, but and I think it's really true going forward. And when I go into especially small companies, this is the one thing that they can improve on fast. And that is, you're not building a brand. You have to build a team of brands. So not only is there endorser brands or sub-brands or co-brands, there's also what I call branded differentiators. There's branded energizers. There's branded sources of credibility. And you need to communicate to others, what your brand stands for and what these 5 pillars mean and what programs underneath it. And if you don't have brands doing that, it's really hard. It's hard to communicate anything without a brand. It just is, because you need a cognitive anchor. You need a source of credibility that people can remember and they can latch on to. So Uniqlo, for example, has Heat Tech and Aerism, 2 branded fabrics that you can only get at Uniqlo. That really says so much about Uniqlo that Uniqlo can say we're really innovative and so on. I mean,
Hey, Debbie, just so you know, we can hear the typing.
Oh, sorry, I'm answering people I'm talking to people in the chat.
But anyway, so Aerism and Heat Tech are examples of brands that help give credibility and energy and substance to the Uniqlo brand. And you can go to these. I go to these little nonprofits and I say, "What's your secret sauce? Why are you special? What have you really done to develop something that makes you so good?" And they can spend 3 minutes very eloquently with passion telling me, and then I say, well, "Why don't you brand it?" And then there's usually silence, and they think that's a good idea, but I don't know if they ever do it.
Yeah, give it a name to.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So we do have our first question from the audience. Unless you had anything to add, Debbie, to that.
No, David said it perfectly.
Amazing. Okay. All right. Francesca asks, if brands are soulless, how can they truly be guided by purpose in every aspect? How can they break free from the logic of profit and growth at all costs? Are they only safe if they have no stakeholders to answer to? Doing good can also be just purpose washing.
Well, I wrote a book about that, and my daughter says you got to stop saying that. But anyway, it was purpose-driven branding, and what it said was that if you are soulless, and if your product is you're making concrete or you're making toothpaste or something, and what you can do is stop doing cartwheels or twists to try to make that somehow some noble purpose. Adopt a social program or create a social program, and that will give you soul. It'll give your employees a reason to be proud of you. It'll give them a reason to be involved and to be part of that, and it'll give your customers you allow them to respect you more, to admire you more, and so so that if your product is inherently soulless, or it lacks energy, it's boring, it's taken for granted, adopt or create a social program, a signature social program that's branded.
Did you want to add to that, Debbie?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think all brands are soulless because they don't have souls. I think people who make brands have souls, and their values become embedded in the manufactured soul of the brand. When corporations own brands, public corporations, they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders. And that fiduciary duty is to provide a return on their investment to their shareholders. So it's a really slippery slope when you are a publicly traded company with products that you want to be sustainable and you want to have purpose, but also they have to be successful enough to be able to provide a return on that investment to the shareholders that may or may not care about whether or not these products are purpose driven or have a mission that they agree with. They might just have invested in them because they thought it was a good bet. So I think that when you equate um, the two parts on this continuum, you end up with some wobbles because you can't always do both at the same time. I think the best example of that in the last decade was the response to Colin Kaepernick and his association with Nike. Initially, when that sponsorship was announced or the support that Nike was providing Kaepernick, people people went crazy. I mean, they were burning their sneakers. I saw a video of a man running them over with his car, throwing them out, and everybody and the stock definitely was hit in those days, in the immediate days after the announcement. But 3 months later, when Nike informed their numbers to Wall Street, the stock had actually gone up. And so it looked as if people were actually admiring that Nike was doing this. I think that the answer to my question here, are they only safe if they have no shareholders to answer to? No, I don't think so. I think that they have to be willing to take risks. And if the brand is willing to take a risk to support something they stand for, they have to go all the way through to the end zone with that. They can't retreat. They can't back away from their point of view. And if they can literally put their money where their mouth is, and if they do believe strongly enough in the purpose and the mission that they've created, then they owe it to culture, to their consumers, to the world to really fulfill that potential.
Well, that's a really interesting position, and it one take is that you shouldn't involve yourself in the political process because you are going to lose a lot of friends and you're not going to create any more friends. I mean, you're going to create enemies. You're not going to create any friends that you didn't already have. And so my take is that I'd rather see you spend your equity toward social programs, signature social programs,
Yeah.
instead of political things.
Well,
But there's some that
was
say
a
that
social program.
it can be the point where we're in desperate times and you have to do that. And so anyway, it's really a tough issue.
Yeah. I mean, I do agree that the more that brands can support movements and missions, the more likely they are to be doing good in the world. I don't know that any mission these days or any movement is void of politics. I mean, that's the time we're living in. And that's, I think, the risks that we have to take. And I think standing up for what we believe, whether we're a person or a corporation, is probably more important than it's ever been.
Something that comes to mind is Patagonia, because they believe in sustainability, but there's a line, somewhere in the sand, there's a line of how far you can go down that route of purpose in terms of what you deliver and what you say and how you go about business. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Well, Patagonia is an enviable position, and they created it, and that is that it's so part of their DNA that almost their whole customer base is of like mind, and so they're taking very little risk by edging into the political sphere because of that loyalty of their customer base and the nature of their customer base that they've evolved over a long period of time. So, but most brands don't have that luxury. Most brands are marketing to a broad spectrum that includes people of all persuasions, and they don't enjoy Patagonia's luxury.
All right then. Okay, we'll hop on to the next question. Thank you guys. Salma asks, do you believe strategy is something better learned through formal study or through practice and experience?
I think that both are good. I didn't have any formal study because there weren't programs like the one I run now at the School of Visual Arts. There wasn't anything like that when I was in school. And part of what I was trying to do when I started this program was teach everything that I thought was important to know when it comes to the philosophies and the practice of branding. But I don't think anything makes up for on the ground, in the hand, practice. I think you need both. I think it's, if I had to choose one over the other, I would say practice and experience, but I don't think that education is ever bad. The more you can learn, learning is a gift, and the more you can learn, the better and smarter you become.
Probably.
Well, I've taught and wrote books on strategy. I think you definitely can learn by studying strategy. There's you can read Peter Drucker and on and Christensen and you can learn a lot and because strategy is very broad and you really need a broad perspective, and all these different frameworks and models and ways of looking at strategy are useful to you. And if you and the experience, your experience is going to be very narrow, and to get a broader perspective, you almost have to get it through books in school, I think. But it reminds me of Eisenhower, who said, "Plans are nothing, planning is everything." So if you focus on plans in an organization, that's not where it's at, because strategy is again, like Eisenhower said, plans are nothing, planning is everything. So it's a process that gets you to the point where you can adapt to environmental changes.
Yeah, I think that once you learn something, putting it into practice is a whole other challenge. What you learn is best practice or what's come before that's successful. And certainly reading the masters is, I believe, really, really important. I think that it's also really important to be able to watch others in practice and learn from those that are making the work and making a difference.
So it's a combination of getting knowledge, putting into practice, and learning from others actually doing the work.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when I was starting out, I was reading David and I was trying to mimic a lot of what he was doing in my practice. And then you get to a point where you start to be able to be influenced, but not necessarily copying. And that's when you can become a practitioner on your own. There would be no branding category today without David. So how can you not think that you have to study one of the people that helped create this whole discipline?
100%. So are there any other questions, Darren, that were highly voted? Otherwise, I'll get back to the future. I'll take that.
What do you think, Jacob? Jacob, what do you think?
Think about what, sorry? About knowledge. I'm a big believer of constantly learning and being curious. And I've taken so many courses, I've learned from so many people, and I've also applied it through practice with my clients. So I'm a big believer in learning from multiple people, because everyone has a different approach, a different experience, and you can adapt based on all that experience and bring it into your own work and create your own way of doing things. And that's what I think is most useful, is how you learn, how you adapt, and how you apply it. So. Mm-hmm. All right, we do have a question. All right, Alex has asked, what are your thoughts on making brand strategy accessible? Some seem to think it can only be done with a huge budget.
I want David to take this first.
Well, I already made a comment, and that is that brand strategy, the, the, the most sophisticated and thorough way of doing brand strategy takes a lot of money. But with AI, it takes a lot less money. And so maybe what it took $400,000 you can do for 150,000, or maybe something that took 300,000 you now do for 80,000. And the smaller budget makes it more accessible to a wider variety of firms. So AI is making it more accessible, and also I think that it depends on where we are in terms of what brand strategy is popular, and that whatever is popular of the day becomes pretty accessible.
Hey, David, I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about how you're using AI in brand strategy? I'm really curious about that.
I have that written down, Debbie.
Oh, good. Sorry,
Oh,
Jacob.
Yeah, good.
It's not my interview.
Perfect.
Sorry.
At our firm, it's used across the board.
But like, how are you applying it? What kinds of prompts would you put in to get something like that?
Oh, well, Debbie, I want you to know that I write books and articles and blogs, and so I just observe from a distance what they're doing. But it's very comprehensive. It touches every aspect of design, creative, but all this preliminary research that would just take a lot of people a lot of weeks to do. Competitor analysis, customer journey, trends, and then the creative things. You give them this thing and you say you want a tagline with these objectives, or you want a brand pillar label with these objectives, and they generate 30 options, of which 3 are worth considering, and then you go from there. And we've used it. I've even used it in some to implement creative in like pitches, where it used to be you didn't have the resources to create some pilot creatives, but now you can, and so it really touches everything. I mean, it's almost, it's hard to think what it doesn't touch.
We had an AI expert earlier today, and one of the takeaways I got from the presentation was to think about AI as an operating system and not a tool. So how can you integrate your systems, your workflows into an AI system versus just thinking about it as one tool, and went into much more detail about that. So it sounds similar to what you've kind of outlined there, David, but yeah. All right, so we're coming to the end here. I'd love to just maybe do a quick fire round on what should we do? Strategy, brand strategy. Maybe some myths around brand strategy, like some myths that you'd love to bust, just to wrap this up. We'll start with you, Debbie.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, one myth, I think, and I think probably everybody here will agree with me, is that brand strategy, I think that there are people that think that brand strategy is just how you message or how you design, and they treat branding as the polish you apply, whether it be the logo, the tagline, the campaign. But real brand strategy isn't decoration, it's direction. And it's about defining what you stand for, how you behave, and the choices you make over time. That is what brand strategy is. And without that foundation, no amount of clever copy or beautiful tools will matter. And again, to sort of reiterate my earlier points, I think the myth is that branding is surface, and the truth is that it's how you try to find the soul.
I love that. Full circle, Debbie. Lovely way to end. And David.
I have 3. Well, the most basic is that people still think, as they did 30 years ago, that branding was about awareness and image, and it's a
Mhm.
communication problem. And out of frustration, in my last book, Aaker on Branding, that just came out this year, I I created a 5 Bs to illustrate, to make sure people, especially entrepreneurs and young and startups, they understand that branding is not just the communication problem, awareness, and I mean, it includes the fact that brand is an asset, and you want to build this asset over time. And it's not so you shouldn't look at short-term gain and be willing to do things that damage brands. Second, it's not awareness; it's relevance. You have to not only be visible, but you have to be credible. And it's not only image with functional benefits, but it's also emotional, self-expressive, and social benefits as well. And brand loyalty is the core. That's the when we made brand equity include loyalty, that's the way that we got a seat at the executive table, the CMO, the VP of marketing. Uh, it changes everything, because now branding touches everything in the organization, from product development to customer journey, segmentation, and so on. And finally, and I kind of mentioned this before, but I, the 5th B is brand portfolio, because again, I think the single uh, biggest misunderstanding is that you're building a brand by itself instead of building a team of brands. And you need to have a team of brands surrounding your brand that will help make it credible, give it differentiation, give it relevance. And well, the final thing is something that when I wrote my first book in 1992 or whenever it was, defining brand equity, it was all motivated by the fact that everybody thought the brand was a 3-word phrase. That's it, and it was this unique selling proposition. And it was the agencies all needed a 3-word phrase to organize a campaign, and they were running advertising back then. It was delegated to them. And so I wrote a book in which I passionately said, no, brand is a multi-dimensional thing. And you've got to have these brand pillars, 3 to 5, the core pillars, and another 3 to 5 secondary. And that's what a brand is. It's not just a 3-word phrase.
I love that. And I'm seconding the comments in here. This should have been a 5-hour panel. We could talk to you guys all day about these topics, on branding. Sadly, we do have to wrap this up. We have another session that's going on right now, so I have to be mindful of that. So is there any final words you want to leave with our listeners, Debbie and David?
Well, while you're thinking,
I've written all of these books on branding, but they're kind of summarized in this latest book, Aaker on Branding. So if you want an overview, you can look at that.
Yes, I also mentioned in the chat that we had David on the Just Branding podcast, where we tuck into the 5 Bs into much more detail. So listen to that. And
I would say that when thinking about branding, it is the result of sound strategic positioning. Positioning is the journey that you take to creating a brand.
I love that.
Branding is the result.
Thank you so much, Debbie and David. It was an absolute honor. Our audience loved it. I've been following the chat, and please give it up for Debbie and David.
Thank you, David. Always an honor to talk.
Thanks for having me, and my apologies for getting the time wrong.
No worries at all. It happens. Absolutely happens. We had a good chat. So thank you again, and over and out. I'll just let the chat comments come in. We do have a bit of a delay, so we'll just leave it on for a second.
And thank you, Jacob. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you for all the great prep.
Yeah,
no worries at all.
I enjoyed being on with you, Debbie.
Thank you, David.
It's just fun for me to talk about branding.
Yeah, totally. It's been a long day. It's 7:40 a.m. I've done it all night out tonight. So it's been a fun trot. And yeah, that's.
I don't know. You look so calm and collected, Jacob.
Because I'm caffeinated, very caffeinated. Yes. All right. So many people have said, lovely chat, amazing conversations. Big thank you. Thank you. Respect. Incredible panel. Claps. Thank you. Amazing. Amazing. People are bowing. So a lot of respect, guys. You're absolutely admired. So thank you very much. And I'm going to wrap it up now. So we'll see you in the next session, which is clarify your message. This is for Star Pass holders with Matt Clatterham. It's the last session for today. Other than that, we'll see you at tomorrow, bright and early, for the mission briefing and all of our good sessions. So have a great evening, morning, lunch, wherever you are, and over and out. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks, Debbie.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Jacob.